Let me describe something, and I want you to tell me if it sounds familiar. You are good at things. You manage a lot. You're the person who finds a way in your work, in your family, in the 10,000 logistical and emotional demands that constitute a week in your life. When things get hard, you adjust. You find a workaround and you optimize, you push through, and there's a part of you that is genuinely proud of that capacity. And there is another part of you that is completely exhausted by it, that suspects quietly and persistently that something about this is not sustainable. It wonders why. If you're doing everything right, you still end up some days feeling like you're scraping yourself off the ceiling. You're not doing it wrong. You're in accommodation. And today we're going to talk about what that means and what it leads to if nobody names it. Welcome back to The Family Architect. I'm Philippa Scott, and this is week 2 of the Mother Awakening arc, a 5-week series introducing the Mother Awakening cycle. Last week we did the full map, all 6 stages. This week we're going into initiation and accommodation. These are the 2 stages that most intentional parents are currently sitting inside, often without knowing it. And they're the stages that, without awareness, lead almost inevitably to the one that comes next. By the end of this episode, I want you to be able to look at your own life and recognize exactly where the accommodation has been happening and to understand why that recognition is not a reason for shame. It's the beginning of the change. Let's start with initiation because I want to build the context for everything that follows. Initiation in the Mother Awakening cycle is the threshold moment. Something changes in your family's life and the system is asked to reorganize. Your nervous system, your identity, your sense of what's required of you. All of it is asked to adjust to a new reality. Most people, when they think about the initiation into parenthood, think about the birth or the moment they became a parent for the first time. And that's an absolute initiation, an enormous one, often completely overwhelming. But what I want you to understand, and this is fundamental to the whole framework, is that initiation keeps happening. The baby becomes a toddler, new initiation. The toddler starts making friends and suddenly social dynamics exist, new initiation. School starts, a diagnosis arrives. Your child hits adolescence and turns into a person you don't fully recognize. A second child arrives, a third. A family member gets sick, your work changes, your relationship changes. Every single one of those is a new threshold, a new request from life for your nervous system and your identity to reorganize. And here is what nobody tells intentional parents about this. You don't get credit in your nervous system for having survived the last initiation. Each one asks for a genuine reorganization. And if the previous initiation was never properly integrated, if you moved through it by pushing harder and adjusting more rather than by genuinely processing the transition, then the next initiation arrives to a system that is already carrying the last one and the one before that and the one before that, which is where accommodation comes in. And this is the stage where I need to spend real time on today because it's the one that captures intentional parents most consistently, most deeply, and most invisibly. Accommodation is what happens after initiation. A new demand arrives and you meet it. You adjust, you find a way, you stretch your capacity to cover the new ground. And then another demand arrives and you stretch again, and then another, and again. That's not weakness. This is what capable, committed, high functioning people do. They adapt, they manage, they find the workaround. The problem is not the adapting. The problem is what adapting costs over time when it's never balanced with genuine rest, genuine recovery, and genuine return to self. So, why do intentional parents become particularly vulnerable? I want to say this very directly because I think it needs to be said. The skills that make you a thoughtful, intentional parent are the exact same skills that make you susceptible to extended accommodation. You know how to reframe. So you reframe the depletion as just a tough season. And you know how to regulate in the moment. So you regulate enough to keep going without ever addressing what's underneath. You know how to prioritize. So you prioritize everyone else because you've convinced yourself you're the adult in the room who can handle it. You know the theory of self care. So you add it to a list of things you should be doing and feel guilty when you don't, which costs you more energy than the self care would have had you given it to yourself. The real sophistication of your approach to parenting can become the thing that keeps you in accommodation longest because you are too good at managing to let the system break visibly. So it breaks invisibly instead. I want to name the sentence I hear most often from parents who are in deep accommodation. It's this: I should be able to handle this. That sentence does more damage than almost any other story a capable person tells themselves because it takes the fact of being under pressure, which is real and valid and sometimes enormous, and converts it into a personal failing, into evidence that you are not enough, that someone better at this would be coping where you aren't. No, no. You are not struggling because you are not enough. You are struggling because you've been in accommodation across multiple initiations, carrying the cumulative load of every transition that is never fully integrated, running on a nervous system that is being asked to sustain more than it was designed to sustain without rest and support. I should be able to handle this, is what the system says when it's too close to its own experience to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is the system is full, not broken, full. I want to give you some of the practical signatures of accommodation because they can be hard to see when you're inside them. You're in accommodation when you say yes to things before you've checked whether you actually have the capacity because you assume you'll find it. You're in accommodation when you consistently put your own rest, your own needs, your own creativity or professional or relational wants at the bottom of the list and call it good parenting. You're in accommodation when your body is giving you signals: tension, fatigue, low level irritability, sometimes rage, difficulty sleeping, a vague sense of resentment that you can't quite source, and you're telling it to wait. You're in accommodation when the idea of doing something just for you produces guilt before it produces pleasure. You're in accommodation when you're excellent at knowing what everyone else in your family needs and genuinely uncertain about what you need. And this is the one that tends to land the hardest. You're in accommodation when you've noticed You're in accommodation when you've started to notice a gap between who you want to be as a parent and who you actually are in the hard moments. A gap that's harder to close with good intentions and better information. That gap is not a character flaw. That gap is a nervous system under accommodation load reaching its limit. I want to name some of the earlier signs that the accommodation stage is approaching its edge, because this is where parents who do the framework can do something different from the parents who don't. The first signal is disproportionate reactivity. You respond to something small with an emotional intensity that doesn't quite match the event. You snap at your child over something minor, or you cry over something that wouldn't normally have landed that hard. This is not about the small thing. This is the accumulated load finding an exit. The second signal is resentment without a clear source. You feel resentful of your partner, your children, your workload, your life. And when you try to identify why, you can't quite land on a satisfying answer. The resentment feels bigger than any single thing, and that's because it is the debt of multiple accommodations going unpaid. The third signal is increasing difficulty returning to regulation after a difficult interaction. You used to be able to take a breath and come back, and now the breath doesn't quite work. You're still activated 10 minutes later, 20. The window of tolerance is narrowing. Those are not failures, they are information. They are the nervous system's way of telling you that the accommodation has reached capacity and something needs to change. If you're hearing these signals right now, Next week's episode is specifically for you because next week we're going into fragmentation, what it actually is, what it means, and why understanding it changes everything about how you move through it. So before I finish today, I want to give you something practical. And it's not a to-do list, just one question. Where in your life right now are you saying, I should be able to handle this? And what would it mean to say instead, this is legitimately a lot and my system is full? Just that. Just notice where the sentence is operating, because the moment you hear it, you have a choice to keep pushing or to get curious about what's underneath. Getting curious is how the cycle shifts, not willpower, curiosity. Two things before you go. First, the Sacred Reclamation Challenge is in the show notes. It's a 5-day experience and it's the first active step towards reclamation, which is what becomes possible on the other side of fragmentation and awakening. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about coming back to yourself. If accommodation has been your default mode, this is an invitation to do something differently. And if you haven't taken the Awakening Trigger Map quiz yet, it's also in the show notes. 4 minutes, 5 questions, and it will map exactly what's activating your nervous system in your parenting right now. That's your starting data. Share the episode with a parent who needs to hear that struggling isn't failing, it's information. And information is the beginning of design. I'm Philippa Scott. This is The Family Architect, and I will see you in the next episode.